Hey, welcome to this episode where we're going to talk about compassion fatigue, or also called empathy overload. And we're going to discuss this for a couple reasons. One is because we are entering more and more as these higher frequencies continue just pour in as we continue to evolve into this new consciousness, which brings us more and more into unity consciousness, which means we're starting to, if not we're already, awaken to the understanding that we are all connected. And so in that, we also start to potentially feel, more impact of other people's energies. So that's one element. And so, for some, if you're an empath, if you're a caregiver, a healer, a nurturer, like even caretaking over somebody, this is something potentially you've already absolutely experienced. And maybe you've known kind of, what it is, and maybe you haven't. So today we're going to talk about what it is, the warning signs, some of the signs that are potentially indicating that we're entering into or falling into a compassion fatigue, and then what to do about it. And the other reason why this is potentially important for this year is because with the 9 cycle, the 9 represents empathy and it represents the humanitarian, which means that all pretty much, I don't want to say everybody, but more and more are going to become, just more caring and more awakened and stirred to what's happening on the planet. And then additionally, we do have so much happening on the planet. There's just so much grief and suffering, and that's just really stirring up a lot of empathy, additional compassion, and caring for each person. So first and foremost, empathy overload or compassion fatigue is really where we start to absorb the energy of somebody else's pain, suffering, or grief, or sadness. It means that we are really sensitive to one's suffering. And what we end up doing, especially if this can even happen from watching too much news. You don't have to be actually with people. It's whatever we're exposed to. The key is, how are we responding to what's happening, what we're hearing, what we're seeing, what our conversations are with people, how is our response? So that's the first and foremost, is how am I responding to what's happening? And one of the first signs of it is we just start to feel really overwhelmed and we start to feel saturated. And one of the symptoms or signs of falling into the compassion fatigue is trying to actually really try and rescue somebody or try to really fix the problem. We can also become ruminating over the situation somebody else is suffering, or the situation. We can become almost kind of obsessive in our thoughts with trying to keep up on what's happening. And that's not necessarily a negative thing, in the sense that we want to stay tuned in, and especially if we have people or have somebody that we know that are in a situation where there's a lot of suffering, including animals. Sometimes animals stir us, in some ways, because we might perceive them as just a little bit more innocent or helpless. So it doesn't matter what, if it's a person, if it's an animal, if it's a situation. It's again really about our response and how we're kind of responding and how we're managing as things unfold. Because right now there is a lot of things that are unfolding, or there's just a lot of people even leaving the planet. And, we have a lot of fires that are creating a lot of things, wars. There's just a lot. And so one of the important things is that we allow ourselves to step back and take a pause when we start to feel like we are either becoming overwhelmed, saturated, indifferent. We can even start to feel more irritable. We can start to feel just really numb, or want to numb out more in an imbalanced way, to needing to escape. It could be just more fatigue, muscle soreness, aches and pains, just not feeling well, more tired, insomnia. So there can be a myriad of symptoms. And one of the first key things we want to really ask ourselves is, what is actually mine and what isn't mine? Because oftentimes, especially if you're really sensitive to energy or becoming more sensitive to energy, we start to absorb the energy, and oftentimes we don't recognize that it's not ours. So one of the things for myself, because I work as a healer, and I'm constantly working with people in their transformation and in their situations. And I'm an empath. So one of the key things for myself, if this helps, is I definitely start to feel numb. I start to feel almost like I'm waterlogged is the best way I can describe it. And that's my indication, or I start to feel like I can't fully tap into my own energy field in the same way anymore. So that's my indication. I need to just take a pause, step back. Usually I have to take some time alone and recover and just be in my own energy field for a little while. So that could be, again, we might have sensory overload. We may need certain things to help us to come back into our energy field. So that could be nature. It could be more sunlight. It could be more water. It could be eating more foods with prana that are life-giving foods or nourishing foods or warm foods. We could need, again, just more soothing sound therapy. We could need to listen or watch certain things that bring us back to, why are we doing what we're doing? Most importantly, coming back into our own center. So mindfulness, meditation, anything where you're just coming back and connecting to one's own heart so that we can, again, get calm enough and really start to feel and hear our own soul within, our own spirit within. Because one of the things that happen in compassion fatigue is we actually start to potentially feel hopeless, and we can also start to even question, the meaning of life, or what's the whole point? And we can just become so disillusioned and so helpless and hopeless to the situations that are going on, especially if we feel like we really can't make a difference in the situation. It's out of our hands, out of our control. So that's really our invitation to kind of come back. First and foremost, is this mine? Get back into our own energy field, get back into our own heart center, and really just take extra gentle care and come into really deep relaxation. So not only do we want to emotionally re-regulate, we want to also give our nervous systems a chance to regulate. So a couple things happens with the nervous system. The nervous system absolutely gets activated. So, and it goes into fight or flight. So we're in that stress mode. And so again, regulating the nervous system, things like, cold showers, even just putting cold on your face can start to calm that vagus nerve and bring that nervous system back in to regulation. Exercising, again, relaxation and any form of ability to relax is also going to help the nervous system. But playing with this, spending, again, more time in nature, usually our basics, once we know what our personal basics are, it's really being able to give ourselves that pause and that permission to come back and take care of ourselves. Because when we're in it, we often can't fully remember or touch and reach into what we generally can when we're more clear, because it actually can affect even our mental concentration. We can even become really foggy about it. But the thing is that we start to get into these and pulled into these heavier, dense energies, and that creates us to just really feel disconnected. Disconnection and disassociation is also key signs that we are in this emotional fatigue. So coming back to the basics and really taking care of our nervous system and coming back into our regulation of our emotions and in our own energy field is usually the first invitation. The other thing, when and if one is ready, is to also come back into seeing it from the spiritual perspective. So when we start to really connect to others, and we want to do that, we're social beings, we want to still feel connected, we're here for each other, and we want to also potentially offer our own gifts and abilities through our service, through our acts of, how we're navigating through the world, through our work or through our presence, through our conversations, how we're showing up in that way. And so one of the key things is kind of coming back to, when we're ready, our spiritual perspective on why am I doing what I'm doing? And additionally, in these times that we're in, really being able to come back to practicing sovereignty. So if I'm practicing sovereignty, that means I'm really coming into alignment or advocating for freedom. That also means I'm also advocating and offering the giving of freedom to somebody else. Because one of the things that we can do when we go into compassion fatigue is that we start to feel like we want to save, or we want to rescue, or we want to fix. And that then actually can interrupt with somebody else's process or experience. And this doesn't always, absolutely does not make sense when we're dealing with suffering and we're dealing with atrocities or injustice that are creating suffering, or events that are creating suffering for anybody, any being. So it's not that we are condoning the suffering, and it's not that we're not caring. We care. We're just coming from a place of what do I have control over and what do I not have control over? Because otherwise we get swept into the suffering, and we can no longer offer the same type of grace for anybody that we feel that sensitivity to. So again, it depends on kind of what we're dealing with. If we're dealing with more like you're caretaking and you just need to kind of pause, and that could be caretaking for an ailing animal or a person. And again, it's our response to it. It could be just all of a sudden we just hit a saturation point, and just from hearing things or things that have been going on in our world. So our response to it will potentially depend on what we're dealing with. We may need to kind of go back and pause and just reset, regroup, and come back into our own energy field. Saying that, if we're really tapped into the collective and what's going on in the collective, which again, more and more we will all be starting to feel more of that essence and impact of what's happening in the collective, that's where we want to potentially start to practice that approach of looking at it from that spiritual perspective. If that soul's having that experience, I can witness that, and that energy matters, because on some level that person can feel it, or that being can feel it. So we're witnessing and we're holding a space. The invitation for us is to practice, though, holding a clean space of that compassion, of that caring, of that empathy, and that understanding. And when we can do that cleanly, and what I mean by that is we're not feeling blown over by the grief, by the sadness, by the helplessness and the hopelessness. So we may need to, really move that energy, really remove ourselves enough that we can come back to being able to hold that space of compassion. Because when we do that, we're holding a higher frequency, and that allows way more grace and impact to create disruption or to create comfort for that person or situation of suffering. And it also opens up higher pathways for people to now open up into. So it becomes really a win-win. It's a very powerful thing. And as a healer, again, if we're holding space for something collective, definitely we're holding space for somebody, like an individual that we're working with, or a group of people or beings. That is one of our most truly impactful things. So invitation is try it for yourself, practice it. And it does take a little bit of time to be able to, again, keep coming back out of those heavy, denser energies. So something that I feel is super helpful, has been helpful for myself with this, is to be able to put something on my radar to make sure I check in. So for me, it's a regular practice every day, or it can be just, again, like throughout the day, I'll be checking in with my energy. And usually by the end of the week, especially, or if something's really kind of like blown out onto the collective and I'm feeling that and I'm impacted by that, that's my invitation right away to kickstart something, add something. And again, not in a kind of really strict way. It's, we want to bring in more gentleness, and we want to bring in more connection. And that's the other thing. We do want to increase our connection. So feeling more connected without feeling weighted by the connection. And of course, if we always need to reach out for extra support, then, we definitely want to ask for that, especially in these times. So the invitation for us navigating, especially through this 9-year, is maybe just be a little bit more mindful, if this resonates with you, to just know as we navigate through this, through some of the changes, through some of the events, but also it's really about our awakening. We're awakening to more of that understanding and that care of other people's situations, and the suffering of that. So if that's happening or starts to happen, invitation is, just keep coming back and checking in on your own energy field. Because one of the things, final kind of note with this, is one of the things that really can mess us up with this is that if our life is going well and we don't have something that is, kind of going off, then oftentimes not only can we feel this incredible gut-wrenching, kind of ache about somebody else's suffering, but we can also feel guilty about it. And we can feel guilty about holding a space of compassion or holding a space of love. It's interesting because through our conditioning or our programming, we, on some level, have to retrain ourselves to not think that if we're not also feeling that suffering, we don't really care. We care if we still feel connected. Again, we make more impact when we can hold that higher frequency, because those higher frequencies transmute the lower frequencies. And that's where we're really potentially going to make that difference. So working through that guilt sometimes is a little bit of a mind retraining, because we do have a lot of programming with that. We're very much set up in the old consciousness to really feel that guilt. So navigating, we're all learning how to navigate through these times in a new way. And so each of us individually are really invited to go within, and the more we know ourselves, the more we will know what it is that we need, so that we can really continuously show up in our most best, highest, loving, heart-centered way. And in order to do that, we do need to give ourselves permission to relax, permission to unplug, to step back, take a break. And that doesn't mean we don't care. It means we do care. We care enough that we want to keep ourselves and our energy field, with boundaries intact, so that we can come back out and really show up. So I love using this analogy with the plane. If you're on a plane and the oxygen masks go down, you have somebody beside you, a child beside you, your partner beside you, somebody loved one, or even a stranger, and you're trying to give them their oxygen mask before you've put on yours, that's not going to be super helpful. And that's the same, kind of the same invitation for us in regards to this topic, to this conversation, to this experience, is when we can take care of our own energy field first, come back into our own heart-centeredness and soul's resonance and guidance, that's when we can really go out and make a really beautiful and loving difference, and bring a lot of comfort and bring a lot of potential solutions. Even if we can't physically do something, that energy matters. So wishing you some really gentle love, gentle care, and gentle compassion for self. That's one of the other things, is giving ourselves that grace to give self-compassion and gentleness. Wishing you a beautiful day. Namaste.